Hello there, TNA fam. How's it going for today? We are back again here at the Impact Zone podcast. And today I want to talk about something a bit different again. This time I want to talk about how it's not sometimes what you do, but how you follow up what you do. I think I saw so many people talking about this situation, so I'm going to use it as an example, even though it's not happening in TNA. We can still apply it to TNA storylines, angles, etc., blah, blah, blah. And I might even take some TNA examples and whatnot as well throughout this. But people were saying Triple H had buried Julia because Chelsea beat her for the title and yada yada yada. No, she hasn't. Yeah, she hasn't been buried. It's not just what you do being saying, "Hey, we're going to take this title off you." It's how you follow it up. Now he might bury Julia. I don't know, but I sure hope not. But it's not what you've done, i.e., taking the title away from her. It's what you follow that up with. You've shown, hey, Chelsea cheated. So, hey, Julia has a gripe against Chelsea and, has to try to redeem herself and whatnot from losing that title. So you've got the babyface chase. Again, simple, basic storytelling, but it's effective. People like Julia. I know a lot of people like Chelsea, but they really they don't like this heel move kind of thing, so that can get heat. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to tell this story. So again, it's not just what you do, it's how you follow it up. So you've got a bunch of people. Let's look at TNA right now. You just had one of your biggest pay-per-views, and I hate to harp on this, and I hate to agree with some people in some ways, but you didn't really follow that up. Now you've got a month later and you're finally having your first, TV episode, and there's not a whole lot there, so people aren't really all that hyped. Now, again, you could look at this in the other perspective of saying, well, that is what it is. People, like with WWE, with WrestleMania, people seem to only be really super interested in TNA when it's the big four or whatever. Maybe the big five, I don't know. But, the major pay-per-views, not the smaller pay-per-views or whatever. So, and even I'm not that enthused, with some of the smaller pay-per-views, because, even, booking for a month ahead, it's I have no sense of belief, So your follow-up from, I think it's 2 consecutive pay-per-views or minor pay-per-views or whatever. This next pay-per-view and the next pay-per-view probably, they don't really matter all that much. Probably nothing's going to happen, But the thing, it's not just so much saying that nothing's going to happen in terms of the title changes or whatever the story being told there. It's more about this, exactly, that story that's starting to develop. Okay, what direction are they going in? Okay, they gave Mustafa Ali a big win, or they gave this person a big win, or they did this with this person, or whatever it is, or they did this with this tag team. So now you start to say, okay, cool. Now we're looking at these guys or these gals or whatever it is being something they're working on. So this last week, they had the System win that Fatal 4-Way, and I felt like, hey, they're going to win. But they had them win that Fatal 4-Way. And I might take the example of Danny Luna in a minute, but that shows me that they have big plans for Brian Myers and Eddie Edwards, at least in theory. Now, will they follow that up? I'm not too sure, but hey, hopefully. and maybe they might be a good team to hold those titles. I kind of wanted to see Moose hold those titles because again, that would make him the Grand Slam, so that would mean he'd held all the titles, so that'd be cool. Before he has to retire or whatnot, or whatever he's doing. Maybe he's not retiring next year. Who knows? But I think that from a lot of what he sort of said that he is going to, hang it up at some point, very soon at the end of this contract. But then again, he might change his mind. Who knows? I'd like for him to stay, obviously, but it's up to him. And I think he wants to only do it while he can and whatnot. So it's up to him. But certainly the roster needs him. So I do hope that he stays for a little while longer. I don't think he's outlived his usefulness or whatever. So I've kind of used that as an example. They're certainly planting the seed there. You got to wait to see where that blooms or what goes on with that. So it's not just saying we're going to make this person win or whatever. It's how you follow that up. What's going to be next for, the system, hopefully, or what's going to be next for Daniel Luna. Let's go to them, now, this thing. So that's a bit weird in some regards to an extent because you've got to heel Kalani Jordan as the champion. So, and it kind of feels like Danny is heel, though it's tough, actually. She's kind of in a gray space in some ways. So that's kind of interesting. I still think I don't know. I still think that some people certainly like her, but I do think that, people find that she's more of a heel now. But I don't really know whether she's technically fully heel. Like, sometimes she is, but sometimes she isn't. But I think one thing is, like, a lot of the fans in the promotion, I think, they respect her, because, she's been there a long time, sort of thing, and she's paid her dues, so to speak, and she's done everything to the right way to keep the ball rolling and keep her character moving and all of that sort of stuff and whatnot. So, she's now in that position of not just being, mid carder or whatever, now starting to become that upper carder, so where are you going to go with her? How are you going to form her into the next thing, or how are you going to use her as the launching post for something else or what have you? That's where it is. Like, what is the goal, or what is the, like you had Ash before win in the triple threat. So I don't know, dude. And I kind of feel like, like I said before, this is a almost continuation of the JC Jane story. And I almost feel like you kind of want to put Ash in there as Kalani's like manager or mouthpiece, or as Ash being, a mentor or whatever to Kalani in some ways, because they have that connection, both heel. So I don't know, and obviously Ash can't wrestle, so it's like, well, at least for now, at least as far as we know. So it's like, well, that's that's helpful to give to somebody, a younger wrestler, but it's kind of sink or swim for Kalani, I think. So, and in some regards, so I don't know whether that's their plans. So I feel like they don't want to do that or maybe it's because WWE doesn't want it, and maybe it's because they're like, well, we really want to see Kalani on our TV and whatnot anyway. So, and we want to use her, over here as well. So, but yeah, like if you look backwards more so, like into the history or whatever, it makes it easier to sort of look at something that somebody did and something, that came from that and said, or didn't. Because, like, if you're looking at the current situation, you're not seeing where those stories or where those decisions are going. You don't know what's going to pan out or what's not going to pan out. Like I say, like, you're not going to know that, hey, in 6 months this is going to happen. It's not until those 6 months are up or whatever, and you've got to that point in 6 months that it's like, oh, okay, so this was their plan, and or this was what they came up with, or this is the direction, or what have you. So it's a lot easier to look at, they were planting the seeds for this at this point. They were doing this at that point. They did this here, and then they did that there. You can look at the journey of Mike Santana. He was there for a while, plugging away, doing his thing and whatnot. So he was on that path, like same thing for Joe Hendry. He was there plugging away for a while, doing his thing. So, and it definitely, was the plan, and or the intention of saying, okay, we can't just, go away from this. We need to keep this guy in the main event, and we need to keep him in the picture. He's not going away. He's, just, building something else or whatever. We're just building something else with him, So, and same thing with Santana. They didn't just like, oh, well, down to, the mid card, or, we'll put you in a tag team suddenly, or we'll do something else stupid with you, or whatever it is. No, here he is in the main event, or here he is, to continue to appear in the storyline, or whatever else it is. So, again, you're building that story of saying, no, we're still going in that direction. So it's not that we've forgotten, or that we've, stumbled, or that we were dumb, or whatever. It's that we're trying to build a narrative, and this is where we're going. So people, still keep the faith and still believe, or whatever. So, because again, we're not going to not do it. We're going to go in that direction, and, we're going to keep this thing going, And I think the Ash by Elegance storyline, if it was going to continue, and she didn't get injured, it was going to be the storyline that, sort of continued JC's storyline. So I think maybe that was, again, because I think maybe they felt like, or WWE felt like, we don't want two of our main guys or people losing on TNA, So, and that's why, again, Javon Evans, though he kind of lost, didn't really lose, and all of that. So it's like shenanigans and whatnot. So yeah, but so and then the whole Kalani Jordan thing happened, and then they had to change plans again. So, but I think, again, if you look at, saying hindsight or whatever, looking at saying, why was this decision made, or whatever, and again, like, extending a feud or whatever, or returning to a feud, doing a nostalgia feud or whatever, even if it's like, I think what would consider a nostalgia feud sometimes, and what would be considered a continuation of a feud, or a run back of the feud, has to be considered like if you're running it back, it's a nostalgia feud, even if it's happened in the same year, or within a fairly short period of time. You're running it back because people remember that this was good shit, like a few months ago or half a year ago, whatever it was. But you're not just to go, oh, well, we can't think of anything else, or we haven't got anything else or anyone else, so this is something that we want to go back to. There's got to be story beats and reasons and resolutions that have changed the status quo, so to speak. Things are in a different place now than what they were. So now it's this, or now it's that, or whatever it is. So now your feud isn't, like Eddie versus Callahan. That's one of the ones that they ran back, a few months or whatever. I can't remember how long it was later. Maybe it was a few months. I can't remember. But anyway, they ran it back after their feud had ended. And it was like, okay, this is a nostalgia feud, but in some ways. But it was like, okay, are they gonna add layers to that? Because it's like things have changed. You can't just do the same thing as what you've done. You've pretty much done everything you could have done with this feud anyway, for the most part. Like, so now where do you go? They've already tried to kill each other and whatnot. So, like, it's not just deciding, oh, we're going to put these two guys together again. It's like, okay, but how are you going to do that? How is that going to be executed? Who's going to win? Why? Or what does that tell you? Or what, are they actually going to shake hands at the end? Or, like, is there another sort of stare down, but there's kind of like this, sort of mutual respect seemingly, and or something, something else, because like now it's time to move away, or now, we need to focus on this, or something like that, or there's another threat or something else, or so you know I don't know. That's the point. It's like these guys have had that blood feud, now it's over, and now you're going to come back to it, or whatever. You can't just do the same thing, because you've already done it. Like, though they, like, you talk about things that they did a lot of times that always worked. Ric Flair versus Sting always worked. Like, I don't know how many times they had matches together throughout the years and whatnot. Even though they had a match, I think it was in 90 or 91, I think, which was the one of the Clash of the Champions. I think that was their first match together. I think like almost a year or so later, Sting won the title off of Flair. I think that was at Great American Bash. Um, and they continued to feud for another, like, what, 5 years, realistically, even a decade, really, in the same company. Then Flair went to WWE for, what, 20 years, something like that. No, about 10 years, 5, 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. And then finally Flair, came to where Sting was, and they had another match, decade or something later, But, and then I think, I think it was 2012. I think they only had one match between them. Maybe they had more. I don't think I remember. But, yeah, that was, that was that. So it was like, I think, like, if you talk about, like, doing some rounds, so to speak, like, that could have been something, or should have been. It's like Hulk Hogan too, like Sting and Hogan. Like, how many times did they do that? Like, even some people say, oh, took that idea, well, two legends, effectively, they had history, so it's not just saying, oh, we're going to do this, saying this is our decision, saying how are we going to follow that up, or where's that going? Okay, this is, we're gonna have this, faction that Hogan's gonna run, and Sting's gonna fight through it to save Hogan. It's not to destroy the faction. It's not to get Sting over or whatever, because he's already over. He's already a legend. But it's to give him something to do and to try to save Hogan, kind of thing. That was the idea, at least, So, okay, you're trying to, recreate that whole thing, but you're trying to, put a nail in the coffin of that story that really didn't get finished properly, and put a nail in the coffin of, their history and everything else that they've gone throughout their careers. Same with Sting, with Flair and Sting. It's like you're trying to put that nail in the coffin, type thing. It probably needed to be built up bigger and better and more and whatnot, because it should have been much more of a important historical thing, because it pretty much was Flair's last match, and it was this one, like he had a few matches there in TNA. I think a couple of matches here and there were okay, but I do think, yes, like, he wasn't his best, but certainly he wasn't his best in WWE either, for the most part in those last few years, and whatnot, or whatever it was, so, but yeah, I think, like, again, like, thinking about, like, if you're gonna think, well, what's the payoff? That's where I think, if you can think into the future, if you know what I mean, instead of, like, the only way to think of a storyline that hasn't resolved yet, to analyze it, to say, okay, well, how could we determine what they're going to do and why and where they're going to go from there, is to ask yourself, like, what's the payoff? What's the payoff? How does this raise the stock of, or where does this raise the stock of X person or Y person, or what are the next few people, like handful of people, that need their stock raised to kind of carry the company forward into the future? So you start looking at those guys that are on that roster, and like Jason Hotches is a freaking underrated performer. That's why he's getting this match with Cedric Alexander. Like I've said for a while, Cedric Alexander, he ain't doing shit FA in this promotion. He's really doing nothing. He's lost every friggin' match that he's been in. What's going to happen here in this next match? I don't know. But that will be a big indicator if he can finally get a win. But I feel like he's probably not going to get it. I think if you start saying, okay, he can win a match, definitely, but does he need to? I think Cedric's made his legacy in many ways. So it's like, what does he need to do? He doesn't need to do anything. And maybe that's a bit sad, because it's like, well, he never really became anything really huge. He was never like Cena, or he was never like Orton, or he was never like this, he was never a main event guy or whatever else he was. You could still make him into a top draw or whatever else it is, but it's like, what's the payoff there, type thing. And that's where I'm like saying the same thing with some of these other guys. Not that you can't use legacy acts or whatever, and I would consider Cedric a legacy act, but he can still go. but still, like, he's a legacy act in many ways. So the goal isn't let's get Cedric back over that much in so many ways, or let's make Cedric into our guy so much, is that it's like, okay, we've got to make our young guys, our young up-and-comers, feel like, holy crap, we need to pay attention to these guys or these gals or whoever or whatever. And, you know, they'll be the next fruits, you know, that are growing, you know, that we'll be talking about in 5-10 years or whatever it is, and saying, you see where they came from to where they are now. They came from, the mid card, or from being effectively a jobber or whatever it is, to being one of the biggest names in the company. That's where Santana came from. He came from being a nobody, then was tag team champion, being a mid carder effectively. And they established that team. They really were establishing that team. And then he left for a while, and then he came back. So then they tried to push him as a singles guy, upper main event or upper mid card guy, a semi main event guy. Then push him into being more of a semi main event guy. And now he's the top guy in the company. So, like, you've seen almost that whole history, from beginning to end, or from beginning to, the top, from the bottom to the top, So that's how you've got to look at things. You've got to look at things as saying, well, what's the payoff if we make Eric Young the champion? There isn't really one, unless you're looking at a very specific storyline and a very specific wrestler that he can put over. That's the storylines that you'd have to tell. Same with Kazarian, or same with Cedric, or same with anybody that's more of a legacy act. Like the Hardys. What's the payoff of the Hardys being champions? Well, somebody comes along eventually and beats them. Hopefully. Then they've beaten the legendary Hardys. However many goddamn time champions they are. 20 something, whatever it is. But, then you've got made people. You've got a made tag team. And I was saying about Myers and Edwards before, they've already, feuded with the Hardys for God knows how freaking long. But at least a year or so. I don't think they're going to go back to feuding with the Hardys. They're going to have to be feuding with whoever beats the Hardys, I think. So that's what I feel like position they're going to be in. And they're going to have to, try to get they're going to be an upper, at least for now, they're still the upper card sort of tag team. Because they were just the champions a few months back or whatever it was. And they're very established. So it's like, well, let's utilize them. Let's give them a quick push and sort of thing. And then when whoever beats the Hardys, we have these guys sort of brewing a bit and feeling like they're going to get back into that picture. So that's the idea there. The idea here with Hotch is, we already know Hotch is awesome, but like Hotch hasn't really gotten any real wins really ever either. Again, the idea is to try to give him a big win, try to showcase him, and try to, start to elevate him, not just to say, oh, well, we're going to break him up in that team or whatever, but we're going to start to highlight this kid and start to say, okay, he's one of our future prospects, and we want to see, what we can get out of him, So, but yeah, it's the same for feuds and anything. It's the same for anything. You can definitely have more of a feud with somebody and have a bigger payout from that than, saying, hey, we're actually gonna pull the trigger, because when you say, oh, this is a feud, it does feel like once it ends, it's like, oh, well, what was all that about, type thing. But thing is, it's very much like, well, this is the space for it, of saying, okay, it gets its time, so that again, if you're going to put in there a legacy act like Eric Young or Kazarian or whoever, I'd say Nick Nemeth is coming into that territory too. So if you put those guys who are already established in there, it's like, okay, we're building this other person up, Santana up. Problem there is, like, you have to actually build up new heels. Can't just keep recycling the old ones. You actually need to build new guys. And it's tough because it's like, AJ Francis is such a good talker, amazing talker, but not very that amazing in the ring. I think he's better in the ring now. He's in TNA than what he was in WWE, but whatever. And botches happen. So, but, what's the name? I think Rich Swann, I don't know what's going on there, because it feels like probably there is a lack of trust, in some regards. So it's like, well, we're just going to, the follow-up from bringing him back in has been very lackluster. So, and I do think, like, I said this before, Leon needs opponents, and Swan would be a good opponent. It would help the fact that he hasn't really got any good stories or any really good feuds or anything going right now. Have a feud with him and Swan, and then, like, when Leon beats him, it's like, well, he's beaten a former world champion. So you're starting to sort of groom him a little bit more to being like, he could be a future world champion, type thing. So you're just putting that, like, out into the ether a little bit more. But then you could do it with anything. But anyway, guys, I'm pretty sure you guys get the idea of what I'm on about, and what I'm talking about and whatnot. So, but yeah, I do need to go through these things. I do need to talk about these things for the people that don't, or just to try to go through some things and sort of think through things and say, hey, ever think about this? And probably people have, but they haven't really given it, like, in-depth thought. So it's always useful to go through these things, and I do hope you have enjoyed it, and I do hope you'll join me again in another one.